Welcome. If you are here in Paducah, or if you're at the Lakes Area campus, or watching this online, welcome. We started doing this last week, and we thought that those who would view online would be a very small number. But everywhere I go, I'm encountering someone who's watching these teachings online, and so we welcome you if you are here with us this week. We're in the second week of a teaching that is called Unstoppable. The idea is that the book of 1 Timothy is written by Paul to his student Timothy, kind of like a son to him, helping him understand how to prevent the obstacles that stop the church that were developing in a church in Ephesus. Timothy is there as a young man trying to lead things forward, and Paul is giving him every bit of advice that he possibly can to try and help him. Now, the predicament that he's in is that he has bumped into a few people who are, let's just say, not nearly as mature as they think they are. You ever met anyone like that in church? They got it all figured out, but the truth is, down deep inside, they really don't. Well, we as a church have been learning about gathering together and scattering, and one of the things that we're learning is that sometimes people who've known Christ for many years or thought of themselves as serious Christians or mature Christians, that in truth, some of them have started to share with me, I have never really scattered. It's not really ever been something that was a part of my faith. I was very involved in gathering and coming to church on Sundays, but scattering and living out my faith, Monday to Saturday, that's a whole new area for me. So I want to tell you a story about scattering that I heard this week. It's a really cool story, and I got to be a small part of it. Someone who attends our earliest gathering here at the Paducah campus came to me on the phone and said, I need you to come out and visit my house. And I said, what's going on? And she said, well, I have a neighbor, and my neighbor and her husband, the two of them are in their 60s. He is very ill. The doctors have given him a few weeks, and neither of them are believers. And so I've been talking to them about Jesus. And I said, that's awesome. Tell me more. She told me that she had been serving them, finding ways to, everything from bringing them a good cup of coffee to trying to help out around their house, and just really been serving them. And over time, the friendship that develops through service started to grow, and they started asking her questions. And the day before she called me, they had said to her, we want to know more about Jesus. And so she told them what she knew, and then she called me and said, would you mind coming out and telling them about Jesus? And I said, I don't do that. Kidding. I said, sure, I would love to do that. I went out to their house, I went in, and when I got there, I was greeted with just this great attitude of kind of a welcoming that was really cool. I went in and I sat down with this family. A family that, by their own admission, had spent very little time around the church, knew very little about Christianity, but were really seeking to learn and know more and more about the Bible and about Jesus and about the things of the faith. And so while I was there was a husband, a wife. They both had adult children. They had children, so there were 7 or 8 grandkids running around. And when I sat down beside the hospital bed that was in this man's den, all of his kids and his grandkids all gathered around me and gathered around him to hear what the preacher had to say to Grandpa. I leaned over and I talked to him a little bit about faith. I talked to him about forgiveness. And I asked him if I could pray for him, and he said, yeah. And then he said to his wife, he said, have our grandkids ever heard a prayer? And that hit me. I thought, boy, this better be a good prayer. And so I prayed for him. I got up and I went home, or I went to the office, actually. All that afternoon, I was so hyped up about getting to share the gospel with a man who did not know Christ yet, who was so intrigued and interested. But I was also kind of frustrated with myself because I didn't feel like I really told the whole story. I didn't quite finish it. And so I called this lady and I said, can I come back tomorrow? And she said, absolutely. So I put in my calendar, I'm going back the next day. I'm going to finish what I started, But I kept praying for him. I asked people around me to pray for them. And I get this crazy text message later in the day that got me so excited. And this is part of the scattering that's going on in our church that make me so proud as a pastor. The lady who invited me there to begin with contacted me later that day to say, Brad, you don't know what else happened that day. She said, a man who lives in our community, who is well-respected and well-liked, who is a Christ follower, he heard that you were there sharing the gospel with this man. In fact, I met him in the parking area while I was there. He went back later that afternoon, and they asked him some of the questions that arise out of what you told them. And so he talked with them about the gospel. And before you know it, he shared the gospel with them. They both, man and woman, husband and wife, gave their life to Christ. And this man who lives in their community baptized both of them in a pond behind their home in that community that very day. Yeah, that's worthy of clapping for. So I didn't get to go back the next day, you know. I'm just telling you, this is what happens when a church scatters. And if we can help define Christian maturity as not just knowing all about the Bible and knowing all the rights and wrongs to live, if we can define maturity as people who scatter more and more with their faith, then we will deal with the challenge that Timothy had as we read the second chapter of 1 Timothy in the church at Ephesus several thousand years before. So let's go there. Paul has left Timothy in Ephesus. Ephesus is a troubled town. Their church is having issues, some pretty big issues. In fact, the issues that they're having result from the fact that they've been Christians for quite some time now. And like many of us, we have to be admissive here and admit when we're wrong. Many of us, just because we've been a Christian for a long time, we equate that with maturity. I've been a Christian for this many years. That means I know Jesus very well. Now, not by show of hands, but how many of you have known someone who has been a churchgoer or Christian for a long time, but when you observe the behavior and the attitude of their life, you're still wondering, you're still kind of wondering, is Jesus really, there? Timothy is hanging out with a group of Christians in Ephesus who fight about everything, who argue and disagree. They have adapted and changed their theology over time so that it now kind of makes them look good instead of spreading the gospel to their community. And Timothy is having a hard time leading a church that does not want to change to become a church that is what God intended it to be. Now, I don't think that ever, that doesn't ever happen in our culture. We don't ever see that happen. Church folk never get stuck in their ways, I know. Never get difficult or deal with the change, right? This is what he's dealing with. And what they have done over time is they have misunderstood something that I think is misunderstood in my life and in our lives, our church, and our world fairly often. It all comes down to this question: which is more important? What God does in you, or what you do for God? You see the difference? This question comes up in every counseling session I do. This question comes up in most marital counseling issues. This question, I would say, is at least at part at the heart of many of our broken moments as we fall before God and share our struggles with Him. Either we are someone who focuses only on what God does for us and never lives out any of the things He calls us to live out, and therefore we are kind of spoiled, or we become someone who focuses only on the tasks that we perform. We might even gain our value from what we do or what we run or what we live out or what our giftedness shows that we have in the church. And in the process of doing, we forget that what really happens and what's really going on in us is not what we do, but what God does in us. Timothy is overseeing and developing change in a church that are full of leaders who have, at least momentarily, forgotten what God did for them. And now they're very much hung